Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, yes, as you may have seen in the welcoming slide there, the Bill of Rights. We've got Mr. Tunde Irukera, who is the Director General of Consumer Protection Council of Nigeria. He also joins us from our studios in Abuja. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Well, as lofty as initiatives may be of this Patients' Bill of Rights, there are several other bills of rights that are out there. What makes you think that this particular one will work?
Well, thank you, and good morning. We're quite confident that this would work for several reasons. First, it's a collaborative effort. All the stakeholders across the value chain, literally every professional in the healthcare ecosystem, came together and worked with the Consumer Protection Council and the Federal Ministry of Health to do this, including professional associations like the NMA, the pharmacist associations, and multiple other associations of the different professionals. And what this really does is to codify or aggregate existing obligations that all these professionals have to their patients in different instruments, whether it's the Constitution, the professional oath, or some other pieces of legislation. And it was something that I think its time had come. There is some understanding that everything must be about the patient. But in reality, there's really no structured mechanism to ensure that both from a training, educational, and consequence management system, that this was the case. And I believe that what this document does and the kind of support that it has received from the government, from the very highest level of government, and also from the leadership of the professions, demonstrate that, yes, we are onto something that would certainly work this time.
All right, so tell us, at what point did you and your team decide that it was about time that there be a Patients' Bill of Rights?
Well, that's interesting. The first idea that came to my mind when I was appointed Director General of the Consumer Protection Council April last year was that we needed to do this. I'd been invited to speak at a medical event within days of the announcement of my appointment. I'd not even taken over work at the time. And so I said I respectfully declined to speak, but asked someone else to speak there and said I'd be happy to meet with the doctors right after their medical conference. And they agreed to meet with me right after that. I think in the first few days of starting work, they met with me. And I said to them that, why can't we do something great for the country? Why can't we just create a Patients' Bill of Rights that really addresses the soft infrastructure of the healthcare system? And they were very motivated. They agreed, and they thought it was inspiring. And so that's where the story started. And here we are.
Okay, so let's look at a bit of that Bill of Rights that as it is. I'll particularly look at the area of emergency care, where it says the patient has a right to receive urgent, immediate, and insufficient intervention and care in the event of an emergency, prioritizing the needed attention above cost and even legal implications or law enforcement agencies. How would that work, seeing our society now?
Well, what that really means is that stabilizing someone who is potentially in danger of death or imminent injury is, of course, very important, and that's a societal value. And so we must prioritize that above money or anything else. And so what that really says is what doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals really know, and that is that the first thing we must do is to stabilize, regardless of money. I mean, and we would provide the minimum sufficient care or intervention to preserve life, and then you can have this person go through whatever other process, whether to go see their own doctor at a different time, or if it's a law enforcement issue, if the person is subject to arrest or other legal process, then it could follow. But the overriding responsibility to prioritize an emergency coming into the hospital and to stabilize the person to preserve life or at least prevent permanent injury It's very sacrosanct. And that's really how it's supposed to work. And now, is there a risk that you might provide emergency care that ultimately is unpaid for? I believe that that risk, I mean, it's existential. But, you know, if you balance that risk with whether you save a life or not, I think it's a dice that is worth rolling. And that's why we're not talking about long-term care or full-time care, more like emergency intervention.
Okay. Now, I asked this question because recently we heard the story of a copper, I think, that was accidentally shot and died on arrival at the hospital because of lack of attention. The medical officers or personnel were asking for police report or police presence, even though she was brought in by the police. Now, that issue of law enforcement and the medical personnel and how they are handled when it comes to stabilizing or treating emergency cases that have to do with law enforcement is not something that's new. It's been there. So the question at the back, on the minds of a lot of people, will be how that would work in our system. Are the law enforcement officers carried along in the launch or the production of this patient's Bill of Rights, as regards to this especially?
Absolutely. And like I said, this is an aggregation of what the state of the law is in different pieces. The current prevailing statutory position is that bullet injuries or any type of injuries that might potentially implicate a law enforcement process are not a barrier to emergency care. That's the position of the law. And what the patient's Bill of Rights will do, and that's why the information you read about emergency care is what it is to educate all the healthcare workers, all the law enforcement people, and the patients and their families. Because we really need to know that there's absolutely no law that prevents healthcare facilities from providing care because someone potentially might be the subject of a law enforcement process. And most gunshot victims are hardly criminals anyway. Many times they're even the victims of criminals. And so it's a sensible position of the law to abolish any such requirement. And so going forward, the only reason why any hospital or healthcare professional would decline providing intervention to someone who suffered a gunshot injury would either be a violation of the law or an ignorance of the law or the rights of the patients.
So under item J, which is withdrawal of services by providers, and with looking at the column, it's the rights of the patient. And you have here to be informed about impending interruptions or disengagement of services of primary or attending professionals responsible for patients' care. And the second item there is methodical and practical transition of treatment for patients' safety and continuity of their care. Could you elaborate more on what this means?
Good. And what that means is that there are times when indeed service might be interrupted. One of the issues that was agitating my mind when that particular clause was created was we live in an environment where sometimes neither the patient nor even the treating professionals have control over the processes. For instance, when you have collective bargaining, so if there's going to be a strike, it's important that there is a primary focus on patient care. Even if there's going to be a strike, there's going to be a lockdown of the hospital, there has to be a process where those patients are transitioned into another facility or a place where the strikes are not occurring, perhaps in a private hospital or another hospital. Other times where there could be interruption, there are all kinds of issues. Sometimes a business is closing. Other times a specialist is leaving a particular hospital to another place. And so it's planning ahead for the patient care to continue in a manner that doesn't jeopardize the integrity of the process and the health of the patient, and transitioning the patient into another setting where that care can continue. That's exactly what that is drafted to address.